Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a presentation on rights of immigrants and pathways to legal status. My name is Dina Birkenkamp. I'm a lawyer with Mid Minnesota Legal Aid, and we are pleased to offer this presentation in partnership with the City of Minneapolis. Mid Minnesota Legal Aid is a nonprofit law firm. We provide services and offer help to people who are financially eligible and who can't otherwise afford private attorneys. We are not part of the government. We don't give any information to the government without someone's permission. We provide a variety of legal services and multiple areas of law, including disability law, family law, housing law, for examples. Today, we're focusing on immigration. Legal aid serves people across central Minnesota with a lot of different types of legal needs, and across the state of Minnesota for certain legal needs like disability law, youth law, and help with health insurance or tax issues. A couple of notes. This presentation is not legal advice, it's general basic information. If you do have specific questions about your own case or situation or want legal advice, then we recommend that you speak with an immigration attorney. And we'll also note that the information in this presentation can change. It reflects the law as it is today, but things might change quickly after inauguration on January 20th. The best thing that you can do right now is what you are doing, learning about rights and connecting with organizations that can share accurate and up-to-date information about what is happening in the world of immigration. The focus of this presentation today is pathways to lawful status, including common types of immigration status and the risk level associated with each type. And by risk level, I mean the vulnerability or risk of facing deportation or deportation proceedings. We'll also be talking about how to get immigration status and defend against deportation and strategies for protecting yourself and your family. We won't get into too much depth on the last topic on this slide because we will be doing another presentation soon focusing on safety planning and going into more detail at that time. The first category of status that we'll talk about is individuals without immigration status. Those without immigration status are at the greatest level of risk for deportation proceedings. And then we will also be talking about people with immigration status, including temporary statuses, asylees and refugees, permanent residents, and US citizens. Okay, but to go back to the highest risk level, this would be people with deportation orders. So, somebody that a judge or an immigration officer has ordered deported already in the past, so that there is a removal order. People in this position are at the highest level of risk because the old deportation order can mean that person can be deported at any time without a chance to fight their case in court. Um, People who are in this category are those who were subject to expedited removal at the border or maybe fought their case in immigration court and lost and received a removal order and then came back without permission, or who for whom the removal order has not been executed. This can also apply to individuals who missed an immigration court hearing, so the court gave them a removal order in their absence or in absentia. It also applies to people who fought their case and lost, but who were never actually deported because maybe their country of origin does not accept deportees. This is less risky than the previous categories because your home country has to accept deportees in order for you to actually be removed to that country. So some people are in a state where they have removal orders but cannot be removed to their countries and may be able to actually get work authorization with a removal order. But policies can change at any time, and countries that previously did not accept deportees may start accepting them. The next category that we'll talk about is people who entered without permission or overstayed their visas. So you might hear the term undocumented to describe this category. Individuals um, who are undocumented, who don't have status, are still at a high risk of deportation. But if they don't have a removal order, they do have the right to fight their case in immigration court. People who entered without permission or a visa may have never interacted with immigration officials and may not be on immigration's radar until they encounter ICE or, in some cases, the police. Um, but if individuals were apprehended at the border by immigration or turn themselves into immigration at the border, then those individuals are probably in removal proceedings and are able to fight their case in immigration court. Um, I'll note that even, if you want to go back to the previous slide, uh, even people who have pending immigration applications can still be considered undocumented because they haven't been granted the status yet. Some people with pending applications like asylum have the right to stay in the United States while waiting for a decision on their case. But for other applications, like a U visa application, don't offer the same protection. However, in many cases, individuals with pending applications do remain in the United States under current policies. Now, people in this category can take some steps for protection by seeing if there's a pathway to an immigration status available, carrying proof of a pending application, if in immigration court, going to all court hearings to avoid being ordered deported in your absence, and making a safety plan. Deferred action is a temporary protection from deportation, but it's not an immigration status in itself. It's a temporary protection where immigration says, we know you're here and you don't have status, but you are able to apply for work authorization, and we are not prioritizing you for deportation. There are some common types of deferred action. One of the more well-known ones is DACA, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, but also people with pending applications in some cases also receive deferred action. So some VAWA applications offer this protection, and also special immigrant juvenile visas also have a grant of deferred action for people who are waiting for a determination. Deferred action does provide temporary protection from deportation, but there can be a lot of policy changes around it. We did see this with the last Trump administration, that the administration did try to end the program, and there was a lot of litigation around it at that time. Um, so because it's something that's not in statute, it's less stable than other statuses where there is a statutory right to pursue that status. There are also some temporary legal statuses. So people in this category are at risk of deportation if their temporary status ends and if they do not have a pathway to another status. Some types of temporary status are more vulnerable to policy changes than others. Um, One type of temporary status is parole. So that's temporary permission to enter and be in the United States for humanitarian reasons. Another type is TPS, or temporary protected status. that's granted to individuals from countries that have suffered from environmental disaster or um, unrest or other urgent humanitarian situations. The administrations designate countries for TPS and can choose not to redesignate countries for TPS. Other temporary visas include certain work or student visas, and now these are statutory and allow for people to get temporary status to study in the United States. And then there's also some temporary work visas that can sometimes lead to permanent work visas in certain job types. There are other temporary statuses that do have a pathway to permanent residence. Um, People in this position are not at a very high risk for deportation as long as they stay in their status and don't let their status expire before applying for permanent residency. Um, Applying for a temporary status like a U or a T visa does not mean that you have that status. However, so like we talked about before, there's still vulnerabilities while being in the application process. A U visa is a temporary status that's available for crime victims, and a T visa is for victims of labor or sex trafficking in the United States. Once those visas are granted, then that person would have U or T visa status and then be able to later apply for permanent residency. Okay. Refugee and asylee protections offer permanent protections to people who are afraid to return to their home countries because they could suffer harm for specific protected reasons. People who do have refugee and asylee status are not considered a very high risk for deportation as long as they stay in that status. Um, Asylum is available to people who fear return to their country and who are already in the United States. If somebody is in immigration court proceedings, then they can apply for asylum defensively, meaning that they're filing their application in immigration court. But if somebody enters and is not placed in deportation proceedings, they can also file affirmatively, meaning filing an application with the asylum office and starting the process of seeking asylum outside of immigration court. So those processes happen in the United States. For refugees, refugee status is available for individuals outside the United States who are processed by the Nations as meeting the refugee definition. Um, and then resettlement happens to the United States. It is possible to lose refugee and asylee status. For example, if somebody is convicted of certain crimes while in refugee or asylee status, they can be placed in removal proceedings, or if fraud is discovered, um, or if circumstances have changed so that there's a determination that that status no longer applies. Let's go back a slide, please. Okay. Permanent residents have permanent permission to live and work in the United States. And again, people with permanent resident status are not at a high risk of deportation as long as the status is not taken away. To apply for permanent residency, you have to have a basis to be able to apply. Um, so, for example, asylees and refugees are able to apply for permanent residency after having their status and their refugee or asylee status. But some other common ways for permanent residents to get status are through family petitions or having the approval of another temporary status first, like having a U visa, a T visa, or VAWA protections. You can lose permanent resident status. Again, if you have convictions for certain types of crimes, or if there is fraud, or if there is involvement in drug trafficking or terrorism. Um, One benefit of permanent resident status is that people who have permanent residency can apply for their spouse and kids to also have status. Um, for permanent residents, protection, it's important to carry a green card with you and renew if it expires. Apply for citizenship. Most people who are in permanent resident status can apply for citizenship after 5 years of having a green card. In some cases, 3 for some marriage based situations. Um, and then again, there's the ability to apply for spouse and children. Okay. And then there's a category of citizens. So this refers to people who were born in the United States or became naturalized citizens. And people in this position cannot be deported. With just one footnote that there are denaturalization proceedings in very rare and specific instances that are usually fraud related, but largely citizenship is a protection against deportation, and deportation doesn't happen um, once somebody gains their citizenship. So, what can citizens do? Apply for spouse, children, parents, siblings to get status, and make a safety plan for others or your family members in your community for people who are not citizens. Okay, so we've talked about a number of these types of immigration statuses, but I'll go through them just briefly to give an overview of the types that there are. So, again, TPS and DED are temporary statuses for people from certain countries where there is like a natural disaster or civil unrest, and that category is designated by the Department of Homeland Security to be in place for certain dates. And those dates can be redesignated, or the protection can come to an end. SIJS refers to special immigrant juvenile status. So, that is a type of status for youth 21 and under who have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both parents and who cannot be reunited with one or both parents in their country of origin. A U visa is a temporary status for a victim of a crime. And a T visa is a status for a victim of labor or sex trafficking. All of these statuses um, can be applied for with USCIS, United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. So these applications take place or are filed outside of immigration court. Um, and then asylum, again, for people who are afraid to return to their home country because they've suffered past persecution or have a fear of future persecution. An asylum can be filed in or out of immigration court, depending on the circumstances. And then family petitions are for family of US citizens or permanent residents. Um, VAWA is a protection for people who have been abused by a US citizen or permanent resident family member who could have petitioned for the person who is seeking VAWA protection. And then there are work or student pathways to status. Applying for immigration status. So, applying for an immigration status could be a defense to deportation in immigration court. If you are detained, in some cases, you can ask for bond. Um, you can also defend against deportation by arguing that the government has no basis to deport you. So, just saying that the reason that they put you in proceedings is not valid, or defending against removal by saying that you have a pathway to status. And some of those pathways are permanent residency, cancellation of removal or asylum, and then related category or related protections based on a fear of return, which include withholding of removal and protection under the uh, Convention Against Torture. And then another possibility for some in immigration court is voluntary departure. It's not a status, but it's a way to avoid a removal order, but does result in leaving the United States, but may make it easier to return in the future if the judge grants voluntary departure rather than issuing a removal order. Um, because many of these statuses or lack of statuses we've talked about do carry some element of risk of deportation. Safety planning is something that is going to be important in future months. We will be holding a Facebook Live training on that topic in particular, but just to briefly touch on it, if you have kids, you can take steps to prepare for who will care for them. It's helpful to start a folder of important documents and emergency phone numbers and to figure out which documents you should put in your folder and carry with you and know your rights. There's some helpful know your rights videos at the website that's given there. Like we talked about at the beginning, if you do have questions about your own immigration status or circumstances and you want individual advice, it's important to talk to an immigration attorney. There's a couple resources here for how to find a lawyer. And it's important to talk to a lawyer who does have the proper licensing and qualifications, because sometimes there are, unfortunately, scams with people who are holding themselves out to be able to practice immigration law when they are not qualified to. So we do recommend um, ALA, which is a reputable association of immigration attorneys. And then there's another resource with our Law Help Minnesota binder. This is a list of free immigration legal services in the Twin Cities area. And then there also are some brief service and advice clinics. Mid Minnesota Legal Aid has some clinics. The hours are posted there, so you don't necessarily need in a well, you do need employment for Wait House and Brian Coyle Center, and the information is there to make an appointment with those. If you just have some questions about immigration law and want to go in for a brief appointment to ask some questions. And then Volunteer Lawyers Network also has a walk in clinic, and Unidos is closed for the year, but maybe a resource as well in the next year. Here's some information on connecting with us. Again, we're offering this presentation in partnership with the City of Minneapolis, who has their information here for their Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. And then you can also see the ways that you can connect with Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid. Okay, I see one question that has come through. The question is, can you ever lose refugee status? Yes, you can. Um, so a person, for example, who has um, a certain kind of criminal convictions can be placed in deportation proceedings and lose their refugee status and be deported. Um, and then somebody who got their status by fraud, for example, also could lose status. Or um, if somebody returns to their country of origin as a refugee and circumstances haven't changed, then that's also a way to put status at risk. Okay. So thank you all for your time today. I hope that this presentation was helpful. And I hope that we will hear from many of you through either our intake line or the clinics that we offer, or through the other resources that were provided in this presentation, and that we see you again in the future for upcoming presentations. Again, we will be offering one on safety planning and knowing your rights.